Hello, everyone. On this podcast episode, I'm going to talk about the patterns of duality and how, the logic of duality is kind of contradictory, yet isn't simultaneously. And for those who don't know, we live in a world of duality, a world where there's always two equal and opposite aspects. For example, yes and no. For yes to exist, no must also exist. For no to exist, the concept yes must also exist. Truth and false, existence and non-existence, right? These are these are opposites. These are opposite terms. These are opposite aspects of reality, right? Existence, non-existence. Yes, no. Before and after. These are always opposites. And following the laws of duality, or the logic of duality, opposites must exist simultaneously as one. And we do live in a world of duality. Our world is governed by duality. There's positive. If there's positive, there's its equal and opposite, negative. If there's movement, there's its equal and opposite, non-movement. Right? If there's yes, there's its equal and opposite, no. If there's something large, there'll always be something small. If there's the past, there'll always be the future. If there's a here, there'll always be a there. If there's a something, there'll always be its equal and opposite, nothing. That's how duality works. It's always two opposites, positive and negative, left and right, male and female, black and white, light and darkness, movement and non-movement, cold and hot, matter and then, and antimatter or dark matter, whichever one you want to call it. I prefer dark matter and matter because we don't really know what antimatter truly is. So matter and dark matter, energy and no energy, existence and non-existence. Do you see the pattern? There's always equal and opposites. If you find one aspect, there'll always be its equal and opposite in this world. For example, there are living things and they're equal and opposite, non-living things. These two exist in the world. There's existence in this world, and then there's equal and opposite, non-existence. There are things in this world that exist, and there are things in this world that do not exist. There are things in this world on the left, and there are things in this world on your right. There are things in this world that are small, and there are things in this world that are large. There are things in this world that are in the past, and things in this world that are in the future. There are things in this world that, that are tall, and things in this world that are short. That's how duality works. It's always equal and opposites. So how does this work? If you follow the laws of duality, right? The logic of duality states that one aspect creates its equal and opposite. So one creates many, and many creates one. Negative creates positive, and positive creates negative. Existence creates non-existence, and non-existence creates existence. Left creates right, and right creates left. Truth creates false, and false creates truth. And here's an example of how this works. I've talked about duality a lot on my podcast, the concept of duality, and the example of duality, other than these, there's real world applications for for example, the earth. The earth is moving, but it's also not moving at the same time. Like I said before, both opposites must exist simultaneously as one. For example, a human being is tall and short at the same time. A human being is large and small at the same time. A human being is on the left and on the right at the same time. A human being is positively charged and negatively charged at the same time. A human being is alive, yet isn't alive at the same time. And here's an example of how, here's the reason why a human being is alive. We already know that a human being is alive, right? Scientifically, a human is alive, right? But a human being is also not alive. Why? Because atoms aren't alive. And humans are nothing more than atoms. So humans are both alive and not alive at the same time. Because the atoms that make up a human body are, by definition, by the scientific definition, are not alive. So a human is both alive and not alive as one. A human being is both moving and not moving simultaneously. Even when you're laying down, on your bed at night, the earth you're lying on is always moving. But yet you don't feel the earth moving, right? Because the earth is just like you. It's moving and not moving at the same time. Although from the perspective of those living on planet Earth, they'll never see the earth move. From the perspective of something that's not on planet Earth, the earth is always moving. So both perspectives exist simultaneously as one within the earth. Movement and non-movement. That's how the human body is as well. The human body is moving and not moving at the same time. The cells in your body are always moving. They're always doing something, eating, communicating with other cells. They're always doing something. Even while you're laying down, there's always some chemical reaction going on inside your body. While you're laying down, the atoms in your body are always moving. They're always vibrating. But yet when you lay down, when you lay down at night, right, and decide not to move, your body does not move. Yet your body is always moving. Both opposites must exist simultaneously as one. You're alive and not alive at the same time. From one perspective, you're tall. From another perspective, you're short. From one perspective, you're large. From another perspective, you're small. Perspective determines what's large and what's small. But both concepts, both aspects exist simultaneously as one within you. You're both large and small. You both exist and don't exist. From one perspective, you exist. From another perspective, you've never existed to begin with. That's how this world works. Perspective determines what exists and what doesn't. That's what most people do not understand. They don't understand what existence truly means. They don't have a full understanding of existence. That's why they can, state with absolute certainty that God does not exist. Because they have no idea what the word existence even means. They don't even know that existence and non-existence are based off perspective and perspective alone. That's the only thing that determines whether you exist. Perspective. From your perspective, you will always exist. From the perspective of someone else, when you die, you cease to exist. The moment you die, from someone else's perspective, you cease to exist. But from your perspective, you will always exist. That's how existence works. It's based off perspective. Perspective determines whether you're tall or short. Perspective determines whether you're moving or not moving. Perspective determines whether you're hot, whether you're cold. Perspective determines whether you're alive or whether you were never alive to begin with. perspective determines everything in this world. So here's how you can prove that you exist. Here's how existence creates non-existence. It's a basic logical argument. A basic logical statement shows you how illogical this world truly is. And because this world is slightly illogical, everything makes logical sense. Because this world is illogical, that's why this world makes logical sense. And because this world is logical, that's why this world appears illogical from your point of view. So here's an example. If you were never alive to begin with, right? How can you die? That's a statement. If you never existed to begin with, how can you cease to exist? Do you see how existence creates non-existence? How you can't really tell what's alive and what's dead. If you were never alive to begin with, how can you cease to exist? And since you can't cease to exist, don't you exist? Do you understand? Since you can't cease to exist, doesn't that automatically imply that you exist? This is how our world works. You were never alive to begin with, so you can never die. And since you can never die, doesn't that mean you're alive? Existence and non-existence are two sides of the same coin. You can't take one from the other. Because you don't exist, that's why you exist. Because you exist, that's why you don't exist. These two aspects are equal and opposite, and they exist simultaneously as one. Just like the planet. From our perspective, the planet doesn't move. Yet, the equal and opposite states also exist. The planet is always moving. Earth is always moving. Yet, because Earth is always moving, Earth doesn't move at all. That's how duality works. If the Earth wasn't moving to begin with, how can the Earth stop moving? Sorry, I had a phone call. But that's how existence and non-existence work. Existence creates non-existence, and non-existence creates existence. And there's another aspect of duality. There are many examples of duality. A light follows the pattern of duality. Light particles, called photons, are both particles and waves. These two aspects exist simultaneously as one in a photon. A photon is both a particle and a wave. And because a photon is both a particle and a wave, a photon is neither a particle nor a wave. The equal and opposite, all equal and opposites must exist simultaneously as one. So, this same logic applies to photons as well. If a photon was never a particle to begin with, right? How can it cease being a particle? If a photon was never a wave to begin with, how can it stop being a wave? It can't. This world is that illogical, but because it's illogical, that's why it makes logical sense. This world is the world of duality. All equal and opposites exist simultaneously as one. Because the world appears separate, that's why the world is one. Both opposites must exist simultaneously as one. Because the world appears unintelligent, that's why the world is intelligent. This world is intelligent. The rules of this world are logical. The rules of this world make logical sense. And logic and intelligence are synonymous. So although the world appears illogical, it will always make logical sense. Although the world makes logical sense, for those who aren't logical enough to understand the world will always appear illogical from their perspective. Perspective determines whether this world is logical or illogical. Perspective determines whether a light particle is a particle or a wave. Perspective determines whether the earth is moving or not moving. Perspective determines whether you exist or don't exist. Perspective determines whether you're in the past or in the future. Perspective determines whether you're hot or cold. Perspective determines whether you're here or there. Perspective determines whether you're on the left or on the right. Perspective determines whether you're one or you're many. Perspective determines how our world works, because our world is a world of duality, and all opposites must exist simultaneously as one. And the only way we can differentiate between one opposite and the other is through perspective. Our perspective determines our reality. You only exist because from your perspective you exist. So that's it for today's podcast episode. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.